Let's transform your child's anxiety into confidence with these proven strategies. Hi, I'm Dr. Roseann, and we're talking about a very common issue that a lot of kids have. That's test anxiety. Let's talk about these proven ways we can help our kids be less anxious about tests and learning in general so that they can really achieve and show what they know, right? I remember many years ago, I had a girl that was so anxious around tests. I just got to say, her parents were brutal. They were like rough people. And they had put a lot of pressure on this kid, which isn't often the case, by the way. Usually my parents are pretty flippin' awesome. I love them. And they were so tough on this kid. She was so anxious. She just bombed her SATs. And so she came to work with me. We did neurofeedback. We did some counseling around test anxiety. This was a long time ago. This is at least 15 years ago. And she retook the SATs. She improved so much that they actually thought she was cheating. Um, and it was, like, really dramatic. And, we submitted all this stuff to show what we had done. They didn't care. She retook it, and she did just as well. They made her retake it by herself and all this other stuff. And, she really gained, I mean, we reset her nervous system with neurofeedback, but she really did learn strategies. And I also coached her on to, like how to love herself despite her really ridiculously pushy parents. So let's talk about ways that we can help our kids be less anxious. And some of them are things that support the nervous system, and some of them are strategies around test taking and different components related to that. So number one, a lot of times kids are anxious around test taking because they maybe over rely on their intellect and they're not actually really putting in the work. So then they get to the test and they're nervous. And this happens an awful lot with very bright kids. Not always, and some of my anxious people really are over preparing. They have a serious clinical problem related to anxiety. They might have OCD. We need to get them clinical help. I mean, this is something that is really, you've tried to address it, but this is the first, these are first line of defense strategies. These are also strategies that work when your child's already getting clinical care. So number one, we're going to establish a study routine. So we know that when kids are fearful and anxious, that they benefit from structure and routine. Now, as I always say, you want to balance structure and routine with fear, because sometimes you can get caught in a rigid pattern where they need everything to be a certain way, or perfectionistic, components. And so we don't want to feed into that. But structure and routine are very important. And that means that there needs to be regular studying, right? Now, you don't want to let your kids spend 4 hours studying when really it's more appropriate. It's an hour or whatnot. You want to make sure there's balance in how they're studying, but needs a regular routine. And hello, you should never let your kid, these kids stay up sometimes till 12 a.m. and whatnot. Relook at what's happening and why is it that they're so anxious, they're over processing. At a certain point, I mean, you need sleep, and that's going to be a problem, right? So you're going to develop a study plan and use active study techniques. So surprisingly, sometimes, I mean, I went to college and I was like, study skills. I mean, I know it was the 80s, but like you didn't learn study skills. And sometimes kids need to learn active study techniques. And maybe that's not just sitting there. It shouldn't just be sitting there and rereading or just highlighting. Maybe there needs to be a physical component to how they're studying. Maybe they need to chunk it and break it up. So support them in some of the study skills, because that can lessen the anxiety. And always think about the visual and kinesthetic techniques, because man, does that make a huge difference. And the brain, just a little nerdy stuff from Dr. Rowe, can only hold 5 pieces of information plus or minus 2. So if you can chunk things under, 5 headers, then what will happen is your brain is more apt to remember them. And sometimes memory issues, attention problems in and of themselves are actually the trigger for anxiety. So any of those techniques can be really helpful, right? So we want to practice relaxation techniques. You're not going to be sitting there for 6 hours and studying. That is not good. That is not good at all. For example, today I had a really busy day, and so did I yesterday. And I was like, "Girl, you got to get your workout in first thing, because otherwise, it's going to be stressful." And I did, and that's my next tip: sleep, regular exercise, and diet. You cannot underestimate these things. As I mentioned, some kids are spending way too long studying; it's interfering with their sleep. Um, we have to have movement. The body has to have movement. And I'm in shock how little kids are actually moving physically, right? And it doesn't mean they have to do a sport. I mean, it's great, but like get out and do stuff. Make them walk the dog. Go out with them. I see this little autistic kid in my neighborhood. He's not little. He's like a man. He's always out walking, and it clearly is doing something positive for him, and he enjoys that. And you want to really make sure that, in terms of diet, you're having an anti-inflammatory diet. It makes a huge difference for anxiety. And lots of fat and consistent protein. Really, really, really critical. And you're not going to gain weight from healthy fats unless you're having a whole lot of sugar and any of the white stuff, right? So make sure that they're getting adequate sleep, exercise, and diet. Not easy, right? We want our kids to practice positive self talk. So if you listen to the other episode right before here, I talked all about positive self talk. Regulated kids have positive self talk. They are seeing positives in themselves, in others. They're not as negatively focused. It really does support the nervous system. And when we are anxious, we're even going to be more stuck on negative things. And you know that. You're trying to talk to your kid and you're like, holy cow, like it's like they have a black cloud. Well, their brain is stuck on that. So model it for them, encourage it, reinforce it for them, and really explain this to them and how it helps their brain. I get kids to do all kinds of things. Parents are like, "How do you get them to do it?" I'm like, "Talk about the brain," and I empower them. Use visualization techniques. When somebody is anxious and they have test anxiety, right? You can literally help them to see what it's like, visualize the success. How do you see yourself doing? Okay, well, I see myself having a hard time. Okay, well, why? I don't know. Because I didn't study. Okay, well, so now you see yourself studying. Let's go back and have you visualize success. Now, remember, visualization techniques, there isn't a super successful person who doesn't use this, right? Sports, entertainers, high level business people, they all talk about it as a secret weapon. And some of my favorite neurodivergents, like Richard Branson from Virgin Airlines, he's like always talking about visualization. If you follow Tony Robbins, the ultimate coach, he does that as well, right? So, test taking strategies. So, a lot of kids don't know how to take tests, and that can cause a lot of anxiety, right? Just because your kid is going to take a test doesn't mean they've been exposed to that type of test. Middle schoolers, elementary school kids, even high schoolers. John Carlo just had to take a pre-entrance exam to high school, and I was like, "What are you thinking about this?" Right? And he was like, "Well, I don't actually know the format of this test. I'm a little nervous about that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So we were like using words like scantron, right? Date ourselves. But we explained it, and I was like, "Okay, you've had a test like this before." And he was like, "Oh yeah." So then we started talking about multiple choice strategies, right? What do you do? How do you do that? And I was like, "How do you feel about it?" He's like, "Yeah, I feel good about it now." And his anxiety went down, right? And we don't put a lot of pressure on him, and he's a good little bugger. He does this stuff. practice tests. In that case, Dr. Rowe should have gotten that guy a practice test, but it was the morning of. Practice tests are phenomenal in reducing anxiety because I find, just like Giancarlo, they're anxious about the format and the strategies of the test. Your kid could be anxious about the content, and this is an opportunity for you to dive into that, right? And remember, our kids are neurodivergent and they have, or dysregulated and they have emotional issues and pans and pandas. Their brains aren't working at optimal levels unless you're working in our brain behavior reset program. Unless you're consciously doing things all the time, they're going to have periods of dysregulation, whether it's understimulation or overstimulation. And anxious kids can have both at different times. They can have predominance in one, they can flip back and forth. They can have both in the same day. So that means you're going to see different behaviors. And when we really show them, talk to them about what the content is, the format, you really can get a better understanding. And sometimes, again, if your child, despite all these strategies, they're so, their thinking is so eclipsed by this worry and this fear, you got to get them professional help. I do find that anxious kids, more than any other kid, are the least likely to get help because they're probably using that anxiety to fuel their hypervigilance, but that can only take them that so far. And long-term chronic overstimulation in the nervous system is always going to lead to depression. It's going to lead to physical problems, health issues, autoimmune, or OCD. I mean, I just see it all the time. So make sure you find help. If you're looking for help, you can go to drroseann.com/help and fill out our solution matcher and get started on these strategies with your kid who's got test anxiety. Listen to this show with them and, dive into each one and you will find solutions for your child to do better on those tests.